Put out into the deep water and let down your nets. Amen. I want to be perfectly clear before I begin speaking today that I am talking directly to you, to your heart, from my heart. We will hear so many words this week, but we will not have very many chances to encounter the Holy One, the divine. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the church's mission statement, the Cathedral's mission statement, reimagining church with courage, joy, and wonder, and just about what your role may be in that. Flannery O'Connor was a 20th century American writer. She's a Southern writer. Often people use the adjective grotesque when they describe her work. And she once wrote that grotesque is just what Northerners say about Southern writers. And she did use characters and situations and violence in a way that to get our attention. She tells a story about a preacher who doesn't believe in the gospel, about a Bible salesman who seduces a young handicapped girl. He writes about an ostracized hermaphrodite. And I remember I preached a whole sermon about Flannery O'Connor's work, and my daughter, years later, still remembers it because it was so unsettling. Because Flannery O'Connor upsets us, but she helps us to see what is true. She thinks that you can only see through the eyes of belief, that you cannot see what is in front of you without belief. You cannot see what is inside of you without belief. And so she writes this in a letter to a friend. I don't think you should write something as long as a novel around anything that is not of the gravest concern to you and everybody else. And for me, that is always the conflict between the attraction for the holy and the disbelief in it that we breathe in with the air of our times. It is hard to believe always, but more so in the world we live in right now. Now, this disbelief does permeate our society and our experience, but today's stories from the Bible, they show us a deeper disbelief. The failure to believe that our lives can be meaningful, that we can have a place in God's plan for the world. Now, the story is so powerful. I just feel so grateful for the music of today. Everything is just like building our sense of participation in this story. Jesus is preaching by the shore of the lake of Gennesaret, and he's pushed right up to the shore because there's so many crowds. They want to hear what he says. And so he decides that he's going to go out in a boat. He sees the fishermen washing their nets after having worked all night. He says he sits in the boat, and they take him out a little bit away from shore, and he preaches to everybody, and he's seated in the boat. And when he's done, he says something to Peter, which is extraordinary. Now, this story is the same story that John tells at the very end of his gospel. And it has a different meaning and a different purpose in that context. And ancient Christians, they loved this story. I mean, judging from the art that they left behind. There are mosaics and murals, images of Jesus in the boat with the fishermen, all recalling this story. Now, as I said, Jesus finished talking to the crowds, and he says to Simon, he says, put out into the deep and let down your nets. And Simon, he uses a word that's just not adequately translated into English, but he basically said, we were toiling all night and we didn't catch anything. As if, he's basically speaking to a non-fisherman and just saying, you may think you're not going to catch anything, buddy. And so Jesus insists, and the boat goes out into the deep. And as soon as they do, they throw the net over the sides. It is overflowing with fish. They gesture to their friends, their colleagues. Later in the gospel story, they use the word koinonia, which is our word for fellowship. So these are people who have a share in the work that they're doing. And the colleagues' boat come over too, and the two boats are sinking under the weight of the fish. And everyone's amazed in the boat. And then Simon Peter throws himself down at the knees of Jesus, and he says, "Lord, go away from me, for I am a sinful man." And Jesus says, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." And the story ends very simply and abruptly. When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Now, this is one of my favorite Greek words in the whole New Testament. It's only used twice in the New Testament. The word zogreo. The word zoe is like the word life. Zogreo is to bring someone back alive. It's like the wanted posters from the Old West. Wanted. And then they show the picture of the person that they want to catch. And in the Old Testament, the idea of catching happens all the time. But in that context, it's God setting out a hook to catch sinners and to bring them to justice, to punish them. And what Luke is describing is something completely different here. Unlike Flannery O'Connor, Simon Peter does not live in a doubting age. He does not disbelieve in God or Jesus. He just can't believe in himself. He cannot believe that there is a role for him in God's work. He reasonably thinks that either the task is too great, or more pointedly, that he himself is too flawed. Now, Jesus does not condemn him when he says, "I'm a sinful man." Jesus does not forgive him when he says, "I'm a sinful man." Jesus instead invites him to come along with all the other sinners who are going to do something magnificent for the sake of God's kingdom. Last night I was at a dinner party and Barbara Osher told me, she said, "Listen, Malcolm, every single person is constantly beset with a feeling of inadequacy." And I kept thinking about that myself. And in a way, the Bible is filled with people who have that same sense of inadequacy. When the angel comes to Isaiah says, "I'm a person of unclean lips. I can't do this." And the angel touches his lips with the coal. And then God says, "Who shall I send?" And after he's been purified, Isaiah says, "Send me." The story of Paul, he's probably the most arrogant person in the entire New Testament. And yet even he says, "I am the least of the apostles. I am unworthy because I persecuted the church." He goes on and he says, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am." I am what I am. And his grace toward me, it's not in vain. Again, speaking from my heart to your heart, I ask you this. How is God trying to reach you right now? Now, whether you feel uncertain or inadequate, or whether you think you're being asked for too much, or that you think you're too little, God is not trying to condemn you. God is not trying to forgive you. God is inviting you into something deeper, into something mysterious. And when you begin to get a hint of this belief that your life just might have some meaning after all, then you begin to make a contribution to God's work that surprises you. And you begin, like Simon, to join an imperfect group of people who improbably believe in God and are out trying to change the world because of that faith. And right now, you may be sitting and thinking this. Here we are in this beautiful cathedral. The light is filtering in through the stained glass windows onto that beautiful labyrinth pattern. The men and boys choir has been practicing hundreds of hours to make music that will lift us to another place. And the purpose of all of this, The purpose of all the care that went into the cover of that bulletin that shows you the image of Jesus and the disciples on the water. The purpose of everything you see is just this: to help you say yes to that invitation that God is giving you right now. Now, not long before the pandemic, our cathedral had scores and scores of meetings about what our mission statement was going to be. And we worked so hard and so many people weighed in on it. And we decided that what we were going to really stand for as a church, we said, reimagining church with courage, joy, and wonder is going to be our mission. And that whole phrase basically comes from a prayer that's in the prayer book. It's from the prayer that we say right after we baptize someone. The prayer goes like this: sustain them, O Lord, in your Holy Spirit. Give them an inquiring and discerning heart, the courage to will and to persevere, a spirit to know and love you, and the gift of joy and wonder in all your works. And the reason we have to reimagine church is because even though we love the tradition that we've inherited, the world is changing all around us all the time. And we need to decide and understand how we are going to be the church in our own time. Flannery O'Connor is right about the doubt we breathe in and out of with our times. It is hard for our neighbors to have any idea what it is that we are doing as the church. And their confusion begins to be our confusion too. So first, let me begin by telling you a few things that I believe that the church is not. We reimagine church because we see how often we and other Christians have misunderstood Jesus' invitation. Bob Inglis was a representative in the United States Congress from South Carolina, and he was my forum guest this week. And he told this extraordinary story about going to meet with Bill Clinton and apologize for having persecuted him. I mean, it's an amazing story about redemption. But he also said this. He said that our politicians basically do whatever it is that we want them to do. They're not trying to change the direction of things. They're just trying to catch up with us. And he says what we Americans seem to want from our politicians is we want them to be like gladiators for us in the arena. We want them to humiliate our enemies. And so that's what we're getting. And that's just what Christianity should not be. Another label, another identity that you can look down your nose on other people with. The church is not the only way for individuals to experience God or God's salvation. We are not the ones with the answers trying to make everyone else share our opinions about God so that they won't go to hell. The church's message should not be that humans are so evil that God had to kill his own son in order to love us again. So let me tell you, though, about what the church is, because it is something so beautiful and so miraculous. It is grace. It is a gift from God that we didn't ask for and that we don't deserve, but we can enrich every moment of our life. God calls us like Flannery O'Connor was called, like Simon Peter was called, like Isaiah, like Paul was called, as sinners, inviting other sinners, other people who have fallen short, to come and join us in this project to save the world. This project, it's not for the faint of heart. It requires courage because it means that we are going to deviate from social expectations. You're going to surprise people by your passion and what you care about. We will not simply be directed by our ego in the way so much of the world is around us. We will try to change a world that does not want to be changed so that every single person is treated with dignity and respect. And we will take risks for the sake of justice. We will. And we will bring good news to the poor and the dispossessed. Reimagining church means being open to the deep joy we experience when we see God's plan for us, a plan for abundance. It's symbolized by the 900 bottles of water that Jesus turned into wine at the wedding of Cana. It's all symbolized by the immense catch of fish, by the feeding of thousands. It is an abundance of joy. It's an abundance of love that is always surprising us, always reaching beyond what we expect. And finally, reimagining church, it means that God is showing us the very deepest part of ourselves, parts of ourselves that we wonder about, parts of ourselves that we have never encountered before. Let me tell you this one secret, and that is, there is a mystery at the heart of our existence that becomes available to us only when we stop being afraid of death. When our primary purpose is no longer just protecting ourselves and our fragile ego. Nearly every day I come down the stairs from my office, and if you've ever seen it, it's kind of behind the scenes at Grace Cathedral. But those stairs, the carpeted stairway with the wood paneling, there is a stained glass window. And in the window, there's this picture of Noah's Ark, and Noah is standing on the top, almost looks like he's standing in the chimney, and he's got his hands up like this, and a dove is descending from heaven. And every single time I see this, for me, that person in the image, it's Alan Jones, our former dean. He's not here today, so I can speak about him all I want. I could never say this if he was sitting in that pew right there. But every time I think of him. And I think of that world out there so filled with uncertainty, so filled with isolation and sorrow and pain, disconnection. And I think of Alan and his ark, this holy place where we find solace and peace and protection and encouragement to go and be true children of God. So this morning, I'm speaking to your heart. Will you be Jesus' disciple? Will you have faith, not just in God, but that your own life can be meaningful? Together, let us discover new ways to live with courage, joy, and wonder. Together, let us put out into the deep water.